"You're too weak to be my guard." She laughed until he dropped 8 guards in seconds. The docking clamps shuddered through the hull of the Meridian's Hope, and Isla Ven felt the vibration in her teeth. She stood in the airlock corridor, hands clasped behind her back, watching the pressure indicators climb toward equilibrium. Beyond the reinforced viewport, the Kethran orbital station filled her vision, a massive structure of interlocking rings that rotated in opposing directions, each section generating its own gravity through centrifugal force. Lights pulsed along its surface in patterns she couldn't decipher, amber and deep crimson, like a heartbeat made visible. "Commander," Lieutenant Hayes said from behind her, voice tight. "Final security sweep confirms we're clear to disembark, but I still think—" "I know what you think, Hayes." Isla turned, meeting his eyes. "And you're right to worry, but we're here because someone has to be." The diplomatic mission to the Kethran Empire had been 3 years in planning, ever since their warships had appeared at the edge of human space. Not hostile, not friendly, just present, watching. Humanity's response had been fractured, predictable. Some called for preemptive strikes, others for isolation. Isla had argued for contact. Now she carried the weight of that argument into unknown territory. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. The air that rolled in was warmer than ship standard, carrying a scent she couldn't name, something mineral and sharp, like heated stone after rain. 3 Kethrans waited on the other side. Isla had studied the cultural briefings until her eyes burned, memorized the biological data, watched every piece of footage humanity had managed to capture. None of it prepared her for the physical presence of them. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their frames broad and dense with muscle that spoke of higher gravity than Earth standard. Their skin was deep bronze, almost metallic in the station's amber lighting, and geometric patterns were etched into their forearms and shoulders, not tattoos, but something raised, textured like old scars. The center figure stepped forward. His patterns were more elaborate than the others, reaching up his neck to frame his jaw. "Commander Ven," he said, and his voice resonated in frequencies that made her sternum vibrate. "I am War Captain Telric of the High Command. You are permitted to enter." Permitted, not welcomed. Isla kept her expression neutral and stepped through the threshold. Hayes and the 2 other crew members followed, their boots ringing against the deck plating. "We're grateful for the opportunity to meet," Isla said, keeping her tone even. "Humanity hopes." "Hopes are irrelevant," Telric turned, gesturing for them to follow. "You will understand our terms, or you will leave. There is no negotiation without understanding." They walked through corridors that curved with the station's rotation. Other Kethrans moved past them, and Isla felt their stares like physical pressure. Most were even larger than Telric, their movements precise despite their size. Several carried weapons openly, curved blades strapped to their thighs, compact energy weapons mag-locked to their hips. Telric led them to a circular chamber where 5 more Kethrans waited, seated on benches arranged in ascending tiers. The gravity here felt heavier, and Isla had to focus on her breathing to keep it steady. "Before formal negotiations begin," Telric said, turning to face her, "you must accept a guard. Our law requires it for all who enter our territory." Isla had expected this. The briefings had mentioned it, though the reasoning remained unclear. "I understand. I accept your terms." Telric's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "You accept before you see what we offer." He gestured to the far entrance. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Isla heard one of the seated Kethrans laugh, a low, rumbling sound. The Kethran who approached was different, leaner, his frame lacking the overwhelming bulk of the others. His skin was darker, a copper tone that caught the light differently, and the bioluminescent patterns on his arms pulsed faintly with a blue-green glow. His eyes met hers, amber, flecked with something darker, and she saw recognition there. Not of her specifically, but of the situation. He knew exactly what this was. "This is Dravik," Telric said, and the disdain in his voice was unmistakable. "Exiled from the warrior clans, too weak for frontline duty, too soft for command." He looked at Isla, fitting perhaps for a human diplomat. The other Kethrans murmured agreement, and Isla felt heat rise in her chest, not embarrassment, but anger. She'd spent her career fighting condescension from those who thought tactics were less valuable than firepower, who measured worth in brute force alone. Dravik said nothing. His gaze remained steady, but something in the set of his shoulders spoke of long familiarity with this treatment. "I accept," Ela said clearly. "Thank you for assigning someone with experience." Telrik's expression flickered, but he gestured dismissively. "The formal dinner begins in one rotation. Dravik will show you to your quarters." The Kethrans filed out, their heavy footfalls fading down the corridor. Isla waited until they were gone before turning to Dravik. Up close, she could see the patterns on his skin weren't just decorative. They pulsed faintly with his heartbeat, a rhythm slightly faster than human standard. "Commander," he said, his voice quieter than Telrik's without that bone-deep resonance. "Your quarters are this way." They walked in silence through narrower corridors. Hayes stayed close, but Ela waved him off when they reached the assigned rooms, a small suite with 4 chambers branching off a central space. The gravity here was lighter, closer to Earth standard, and her lungs expanded gratefully. "Thank you," she said to Dravik, who stood in the doorway. He inclined his head. The bioluminescent marks on his forearms brightened slightly, then dimmed. "They assigned me to you because they believe it is an insult," he said, "to both of us." Isla studied him. "And is it?" "That depends," Dravik said, "on whether you measure strength by mass alone." He left before she could respond. The formal dinner was held in a chamber where the gravity increased in zones, rising from Earth standard at the edges to what felt like 1.5 at the center table. Ela felt the pull in her legs, the strain in her lower back, but she kept her posture straight as she took her assigned seat. Dravik stood behind her, hands clasped at his waist, his presence quiet but constant. The meal was elaborate. Protein that tasted like venison, grains with a nutty bitterness, some kind of fermented drink that burned going down. Telrik held court at the head of the table, speaking about Kethran history, their expansion into 7 star systems, their philosophy of strength through conflict. "Your species," he said, looking directly at Isla, "evolved on a forgiving world. Low gravity, abundant resources, you know nothing of true hardship." "We've had our share," Isla said evenly. "Different challenges breed different strengths." A Kethran across the table, younger, his patterns still fresh and bright, leaned forward. "Like what? Your ability to flee? To hide behind technology?" Isla felt Hayes tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. "Like our ability to adapt, to solve problems with more than force." The young Kethran stood abruptly. Words from a fragile creature. He gestured to the others. "Shall we test her worthiness?" 8 guards rose from positions along the walls, massive Kethrans, each carrying the ceremonial blades Isla had seen throughout the station. They moved toward her in formation, their intent unmistakable. This was a test, sanctioned by silence from Telrik and the others. Isla started to rise, her mind already calculating exits, defensive positions, the distance to Hayes and her sidearm. Dravik moved. One moment he was still, the next he was between her and the approaching guards. His movements were liquid, economical, nothing wasted. The first guard reached for him, and Dravik redirected the momentum, using the heavier gravity at the table's center to send the Kethran stumbling into his companion. They collided with a sound like falling stone. The second pair came faster, more coordinated. Dravik dropped low, sweeping legs, and the gravity did the rest. Both guards crashed down, their weight working against them. The remaining 4 attacked simultaneously. Dravik caught one wrist, twisted, and the guard's own strength became leverage. He flowed between them, never staying in one position, always moving to zones where the variable gravity made their mass a liability. A strike to a pressure point, a joint lock that sent one guard to his knees, a throw that used rotation and momentum to put another on his back. 8 seconds, maybe 10. All 8 guards were down, groaning, struggling to rise under their own weight and the increased gravity. Dravik stood in the center, barely breathing hard, his bioluminescent marks blazing bright blue-green across his arms and throat. The chamber was silent. Dravik returned to his position behind Ila's chair, hands clasped again as if nothing had happened. Isla looked at Telrik, whose expression had frozen somewhere between shock and calculation. Then she looked at Dravik, at the steady rise and fall of his shoulders, the faint glow still pulsing in his skin. "You were saying," Isla said quietly to the young Kethran, who remained in his seat, "something about strength?" No one answered. The dinner continued in strained silence, but Isla barely tasted the rest of her meal. Her attention stayed on the guard behind her, the one they called too weak, too soft. The one who had just rewritten her understanding of what strength meant. Isla woke to the sound of the station's rotation, a low hum that vibrated through the walls, rhythmic and constant. The quarters were dark, except for the faint glow strips along the floor, pulsing in time with some cycle she hadn't yet learned. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous night's dinner in her mind. 8 guards down in seconds. The shocked silence. The way Dravik had returned to his position as if he'd done nothing more remarkable than open a door. She rose and dressed, choosing practical clothing over formal diplomatic attire, dark pants, a fitted jacket with reinforced shoulders. If last night had taught her anything, it was that protocol here meant less than capability. Dravik was waiting outside her door when she emerged. He stood with his back to the wall, arms crossed, those bioluminescent patterns dim in the station's artificial morning cycle. His eyes tracked her movement with the same precise attention she'd seen in the combat. Always aware, always calculating angles. "Commander," he said, straightening, "I'm to escort you to the preparation chambers. The summit begins in 2 rotations. 2 rotations, Isla repeated. About 16 hours by our measure. Closer to 14. Kethran days are shorter. He gestured down the corridor. This way. They walked together, and Isla noticed how other Kethrans moved aside when they passed, not for her, but for him. Their expressions ranged from contempt to something harder to read. Fear, maybe, or respect they refused to acknowledge. "Last night," Isla said, keeping her voice low. "That wasn't standard protocol, was it?" Dravik's jaw tightened slightly. "No, that was Telric testing you and testing me to see if I would fail to protect you." "You didn't fail. I wasn't supposed to succeed." He glanced at her and something in his expression softened. They expected me to be overwhelmed to prove their point about my weakness. Instead, you proved theirs. The corner of his mouth lifted, barely but enough. Something like that. The preparation chambers were smaller than she expected, with multiple workstations arranged around a central display table. Holographic projections floated above it, showing station schematics, diplomatic schedules, security protocols. Hayes was already there with the rest of her team, reviewing data on portable tablets. "Commander," Hayes said, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure they'd let you work from here. Thought they might keep you isolated." "They're confident," Isla said, moving to the table. "Or they want us to feel watched." "Both," Dravik said from the doorway. "I'll be outside if you need me." "Stay," Isla said. The word came out more command than request, and she saw Hayes's eyebrows rise. "You know this station better than any of us. Your insight would be valuable." Dravik hesitated, then stepped inside. The room felt smaller with him in it, his presence drawing attention even when he remained still. They worked through the morning rotation, planning security positions, reviewing the summit agenda, identifying potential flashpoints in the negotiations. Isla found herself watching Dravik more than she intended. The way he moved around the table, careful not to crowd the human crew, the way his patterns brightened slightly when he was thinking hard about something. "Here," he said, pointing to a section of the schematic. "This corridor connects to the main summit chamber. It has manual overrides on the gravity plating. If something goes wrong..." "You could control the environment," Isla finished. "Turn their size against them." "Yes," he met her eyes across the table. "It's how I've survived this long. Adaptation instead of force." Hayes made a sound that might have been approval, and Isla saw the shift in her crew's posture. They'd been wary of Dravik, uncertain. Now they leaned in, asking questions, listening to his answers about Kethran security protocols and cultural pressure points. Hours passed. The crew eventually dispersed to eat and rest, leaving Isla and Dravik alone with the holographic displays. The station's lighting had shifted to a deeper amber, signaling evening cycle. "Why were you exiled?" Isla asked. The question had been building since the night before, since she'd seen the way other Kethrans looked at him. Dravik was quiet for a long moment. His hands rested on the edge of the display table, and his bioluminescent marks pulsed slowly, a rhythm that seemed tied to his breathing. 3 years ago, he said finally, I was assigned to a raiding party. We were to strike a settlement on the 4th moon of Kelthis, a mining colony that had resisted Kethran expansion. The orders were clear, no survivors. Isla felt something cold settle in her chest. But when we arrived, the settlement was mostly families, workers, children. His voice stayed level, but his marks flared brighter. The others saw enemies. I saw people who couldn't defend themselves. I refused the order, stood between my squad and the civilians. They didn't kill you for that? Execution would have been merciful. Instead, they exiled me, stripped my rank, labeled me weak, unfit for warrior status. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his amber eyes made her breath catch. They assigned me to diplomatic escort duty, the lowest position, a punishment meant to shame me until I chose death over dishonor. But you didn't choose death. No, his marks dimmed again. I chose to live with the shame, because those families lived too, and that was worth more than honor. Isla moved around the table, closing the distance between them. She was tall for a human woman, but still had to look up to meet his eyes. What you did last night wasn't weakness, and what you did 3 years ago wasn't either. Your people would see it that way. His voice was quiet. Mine do not. Then maybe, Isla said, your people are measuring the wrong things. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Dravik's hand lifted, hesitated, then settled on her shoulder, carefully, as if she might break under the weight. His skin was warm through her jacket, and she could feel the faint vibration of those bioluminescent marks against her collarbone. You're not what I expected, he said. Neither are you. They stood like that for a heartbeat longer than professional, longer than safe. Then Dravik stepped back, his hand falling away, and the moment fractured into something they could both ignore. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow will be difficult. Isla nodded, not trusting her voice to stay steady. She left the preparation chamber, feeling his gaze on her back until the door sealed behind her. The summit hall was enormous, designed to hold hundreds. Tiered seating rose on all sides, and the center floor was polished to a mirror shine. Isla entered with her full diplomatic team, Hayes on her right, 2 security officers flanking them. Dravik walked slightly behind, but she felt his presence like a steadying hand. The Kethran High Command sat on the upper tiers. Telric and 4 others she hadn't met, all wearing ceremonial armor etched with intricate patterns. Below them, witnesses filled the remaining seats. Their collective attention focused on the humans like a physical weight. The proceedings began with ritual. Telric spoke of Kethran history, their expansion, their philosophy of earned worth. Isla responded with humanity's own story. Survival against odds, cooperation across cultures, the strength found in diversity rather than uniformity. She was midway through outlining proposed trade agreements when the explosion hit. The sound was massive, overwhelming, a pressure wave that slammed through the chamber and sent bodies tumbling. Isla felt herself thrown backward, her shoulder striking the polished floor with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. Smoke filled the space, acrid and thick, and alarm systems screamed in frequencies that made her skull ache. Hands grabbed her, Dravik pulling her upright with enough force to lift her off her feet. His face was close to hers, his marks blazing so bright they cut through the smoke like beacons. Move, he said, and there was nothing soft in his voice now. Now. She stumbled with him toward the exit, but the main doors were blocked by debris, twisted metal, and sparking conduits. Hayes was shouting orders, trying to organize the team, but another explosion rocked the far side of the chamber. The tiered seating began to collapse, and Kethrans and humans alike scattered in every direction. Dravik changed course, pulling Isla toward a smaller access door she hadn't noticed before. He keyed the panel with practiced speed, and it hissed open to reveal a narrow maintenance passage. Hayes, Isla shouted over the chaos. This way! But a third explosion cut off her words, and the floor between them buckled. Hayes disappeared behind a wall of smoke and falling debris. Isla lunged forward, but Dravik caught her around the waist, hauling her backward into the passage. "We have to—" "They're trained for this," Dravik said, his grip unrelenting. "Your crew knows emergency protocols. Right now, you're the target." The door sealed behind them with a pressurized hiss, muffling the sounds of destruction. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in red. Dravik finally released her, but stayed close, his body positioned between her and the corridor ahead. Isla's hands were shaking. She forced them still, forced her breathing to slow. What just happened? Sabotage. Dravik's expression was grim. Coordinated, multiple charges placed in structural weak points. He pulled a compact weapon from his belt, something she hadn't known he was carrying. Someone doesn't want these negotiations to succeed. "Your people are mine." "Does it matter right now?" He met her eyes. "We need to move. The maintenance levels connect to emergency escape pods, but we'll have to go through damaged sections. Stay close." They moved deeper into the station's infrastructure, away from the summit chamber, away from her crew. The gravity here was inconsistent, fluctuating as damaged systems struggled to compensate. Isla felt her stomach lurch as they passed through zones where up and down became suggestions rather than constants. Behind them, deeper in the station, something exploded again. Smaller this time, but closer. "They're sealing sections," Dravik said, his voice tight, "trying to contain us." Contain us specifically. He looked back at her, and in the red emergency lighting, his bioluminescent marks seemed to pulse with warning. "Yes," he said, "I think someone wants us both dead." The maintenance corridor twisted through the station's skeleton. Isla followed Dravik through passages barely wide enough for his shoulders, the metal warm under her palm when the gravity shifted unexpectedly. She could hear stressed support structures groaning in the distance. "How well do you know these sections?" she asked. "Well enough." Dravik paused at an intersection, checking a wall-mounted panel. "I've spent 3 years walking routes no one else wanted." "Their loss." He glanced back, surprise flickering across his face. "You keep saying things like that." "Because they're true." They descended through access shafts where gravity increased with each level. By the 3rd level, Isla was breathing hard, muscles burning. The service hub was larger than expected, a circular chamber with workstations around a central data column. Heat radiated from the walls in waves, and sweat broke across Isla's skin within seconds. "Temperature regulation is offline," Dravik said, moving to a console. "Coolant lines are ruptured. We have maybe 30 minutes before this becomes uninhabitable." Isla pulled off her jacket, now soaked through. She moved to another console, accessing security feeds. Most cameras were offline, but she found 2 functioning, one showing the evacuated summit chamber, another showing Kethran officers arguing on the command deck. "Dravik, look." He crossed to her, standing close enough that she felt his body heat. On screen, Telric gestured sharply at another Kethran, older, patterns covering nearly his entire visible skin. "Commander Reveth," Dravik said, voice tight. "My former commanding officer, the one who ordered the Kelthis strike." They watched Raveth strike the console, the feed cut out. "He's behind this," Isla said, "the sabotage. He wants the negotiations to fail, wants me dead before I can testify about the civilian executions." Dravik's jaw clenched. "We need to reach the high command. First we survive." The temperature continued rising. Isla's vision blurred, head pounding. Dravik pointed to a ventilation shaft. "That connects to emergency cooling sections." They crawled through passages radiating heat like an oven. Isla's hands burned on the metal, lungs scorched with each breath. Then the temperature dropped suddenly, a wall of cold that hit like a physical force. They emerged where frost formed on walls, breath misting in clouds. "Overcorrection," Dravik said through chattering teeth. Isla's wet clothing turned icy against her skin. Beside her, Dravik's marks dimmed almost completely, his body struggling with the cold. Kethrans evolved on hot worlds. This temperature was dangerous for him. She pressed against his side. "Body heat, we share it or freeze." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her tight. They walked pressed together, his warmth bleeding into her cold. Isla felt his heartbeat through his ribs, faster than human standard, but steady. "Tell me something," she said. a memory that didn't hurt. Dravik was quiet then. There's a valley on Kelthara. During breeding season, bioluminescent insects fill the air at night, millions of them, creating patterns like living constellations. I watched them before warrior training, before everything became about combat. It sounds beautiful. It was, his arm tightened. What about you? I was a tactical officer, defending civilian transports when raiders attacked. I created a diversion, drew them away while the convoy escaped. That sounds right. It was, but the diversion cost 2 ships, 37 crew. Isla felt the old weight settle. The inquiry cleared me, but the Admiralty transferred me to Diplomatic Corps, a graceful exile. So we're both outcasts. Seems that way. They reached a junction where temperatures stabilized. Dravik released her reluctantly, and Isla felt the absence of his warmth like a loss. The service tunnel opened onto an observation deck overlooking central atriums. Through the viewport, she saw damage, entire sections venting atmosphere, debris floating beyond force fields. That corridor leads to command, Dravik said, but it'll be guarded by Ravith's people. Isla's tactical training reasserted itself. What if we go to the communication array instead? Broadcast what we know station-wide. Dravik's marks brightened. The main array has independent power, but Ravith will have it monitored. Then we make him divide his attention. Isla pulled up a schematic. Trigger a false alarm in the docking section. While his people respond, we access the array. That's risky. Everything is, she met his eyes, but waiting here is riskier. He studied her, then nodded. Stay close. I can handle myself. I know. His hand settled against her jaw, warm, calloused, careful. But I'd rather you didn't have to. Isla's breath caught. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, marks flaring bright blue-green. She saw conflict in his expression, awareness of boundaries being crossed. She leaned into his touch instead of away. Dravik! He kissed her, carefully at first as if she might break. Then deeper, when she responded, her hand gripping his shoulder, pulling him closer. His arm wrapped around her waist, controlled strength keeping him gentle even as the kiss intensified. When they broke apart, breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers, his marks blazed bright enough to cast blue-green shadows. That was unprofessional, he said quietly. Extremely. Isla's hand was still fisted in his shirt. We should probably not do it again. Neither moved away. After this is over, Isla said, we're going to have a conversation about what this means. Dravik smiled, actually smiled. I look forward to it. They separated reluctantly. Something had shifted between them, settled into place. Isla felt it in how they moved together now, anticipating actions, trusting without question. They reached the trigger point and Dravik set off the false alarm, a cascade failure that would read as catastrophic. Alarm screamed, running footsteps rushing to respond. The communication array was unguarded. Dravik accessed controls while Isla kept watch. I'm in, he said, recording. Isla spoke clearly into the pickup. This is Commander Isla Ven. The sabotage was orchestrated by Commander Ravith to prevent negotiations and silence witnesses to war crimes on Kelthies. Dravik refused illegal orders to execute civilians and was exiled. The evidence... The door exploded inward. Raveth stood in the opening, flanked by 6 guards. His patterns were dark with rage, weapon aimed at Dravik's chest. Evidence, he said, that will die with you both. Isla's hand moved to her sidearm, but Dravik caught her wrist. His grip was firm, urgent. 6 armed guards in an enclosed space meant casualties. They needed another approach. Commander Ravith, Dravik said, voice cold. You're too late. The transmission already went out. Ravith's patterns darkened. You're lying. I monitored all signals. Then you monitored poorly. Dravik positioned himself between Isla and the weapons. The message went to every terminal. The High Command knows everything. Isla saw doubt flicker in Raveth's eyes. She pressed forward. Your subordinates heard it too. How long before they question their loyalty to a commander who orders civilian massacres? One guard glanced at another. Ravith's weapon swung toward his own man. Stay focused. This is human deception. Is it? Isla kept her voice steady. Or are you afraid they'll realize you're exactly what you accuse Dravik of being? Weak. So weak you murdered defenseless people to feel strong. Raveth's weapon snapped back to her. You know nothing of strength. I know it takes more courage to refuse an immoral order than follow one. Dravik proved that. The guard lowered his weapon slightly. Raveth noticed, rage twisting his features. He fired. Dravik moved sideways, slamming his palm against the wall panel. Gravity plating responded instantly, increasing to double standard around the array. Raveth and his guards dropped to their knees under sudden weight, weapons clattering to the deck. Isla lunged for the nearest fallen weapon. Dravik moved through the gravity field like water, his leaner frame carrying less mass. He disarmed 2 guards before they could recover, movements precise and devastating. 2 guards threw their weapons down, hands raised. 3 remained, including Raveth, struggling under the gravity. It's over, Dravik said, standing above his former commander. No. The voice came from the doorway. Telric stood there with 4 officers, no weapons drawn. He's the only one who understood what strength actually means. Raveth struggled to rise. War Captain, I can explain. Explain how you orchestrated attacks on peace negotiations, how you murdered civilians. Telric's patterns blazed with fury. We heard everything, Raveth. You've dishonored our entire people. Telric's officers secured Raveth and his loyalists. Dravik adjusted gravity back to standard, and prisoners were hauled upright, restrained. Telric approached Dravik. The 2 Kethrans stood face to face. Then Telric placed his fist over his heart. Respect between warriors. I judged you weak, Telric said. I was wrong. Dravik's marks pulsed once, then settled. I did what was necessary. You protected the commander, exposed corruption, honored both peoples. Telric glanced at Isla. Your exile is revoked. You may return to the warrior clans with full rank restored. Isla's breath caught. Dravik could go home, reclaim everything he'd lost. She forced herself to smile despite the hollow feeling in her chest. That's wonderful. Dravik looked at her, then back at Telric. I'm honored, but I decline. Telric's patterns flickered with confusion. You refuse restoration? Because I found something more valuable. Dravik moved to Isla's side, shoulders touching. Commander Ven needs a security liaison for ongoing relations, someone who understands both cultures. Isla stared at him. You're choosing to stay? I'm choosing where I want to be. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. If you'll have me. Relief, joy, disbelief collided in her throat. She squeezed his hand. Yes, absolutely yes. Telric watched them, understanding shifting across his features. Then it's settled. Negotiations continue with Dravik as liaison. He gestured to his officers. Take Raveth to confinement. Hayes appeared with the crew, relief visible. Commander, the Meridian's Hope reports minimal damage. We're not evacuating, Isla said. We're finishing what we came to do. The next hours blurred. Medical teams treated injured, engineers assessed damage. Isla met with the High Command, outlining terms, shared resources, trade agreements, cultural exchange. The Kethrans listened with new attentiveness, dismissiveness replaced by respect. Dravik stood beside her throughout, translating nuances, offering insights. They worked in tandem, bridging the gap between peoples through understanding rather than force. When sessions concluded, Isla found herself in her quarters with Dravik. The station had entered night cycle, lights dimmed to amber. She collapsed onto the bench by the viewport, exhaustion catching up. Dravik sat beside her, close enough that she felt his warmth. His marks glowed softly, pulsing with steady rhythm. You really meant it, she said quietly, about staying. I meant it. He looked at her, amber eyes reflecting starlight. I spent 3 years thinking I'd lost everything, but I just hadn't found the right place yet. The right place, Isla repeated. Or the right person? His marks brightened, both maybe. She leaned against him, head resting on his shoulder. His arm came around her, holding her close. Outside, stars wheeled past as the station rotated. What happens now, she asked. Now we help our peoples understand each other. Prove that strength comes in more forms than they imagined. He pressed his lips to her hair, and we figure out what this is between us. I know what it is. Isla tilted her head to look at him. Do you? I'm starting to. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. On Kelthara, when our marks respond to someone, it means recognition, not just attraction, but something deeper, a bond. And yours respond to me? Constantly. He smiled, that rare expression. Makes it hard to focus in diplomatic meetings. Isla laughed, the sound surprising her. After everything, explosions, cold, confrontation, they could still find joy. We'll figure it out, she said. The politics, the differences, the logistics. Together. Together. He kissed her then, slow and deep, a promise made physical. When they broke apart, Dravik's marks blazed bright enough to light the chamber. Isla traced one with her fingertip, following the pattern down his forearm. Beautiful, she murmured. They're scars from warrior training. Still beautiful, because they're part of you. She met his eyes. All of you. The days that followed brought structure to chaos. The peace treaty was signed with ceremony, trade routes established, a joint research station proposed at the border. Isla's mission extended from 3 weeks to 3 months. She didn't mind. Dravik moved his quarters adjacent to hers, close enough to work together late into night cycles, close enough that when work was done he could pull her into his arms, remind her they'd built something more than political alliance. On the final day before the Meridian's Hope departed, Isla stood in the docking bay watching supplies load. The ship would carry her back to human space for debriefing. It would carry Dravik too, officially as security liaison, unofficially as something she felt but didn't have words for yet. He found her there, approached silent despite his size. Ready to go home? Isla considered the question. Home had been Earth once, then various ships and stations, but standing here with Dravik, the definition felt different. I think home might be wherever we're headed next, she said. His hand found hers, that gesture now natural between them. The Meridian's Hope, then. I've never seen Earth. The gravity will feel strange. I'll adapt, he squeezed her hand. I'm good at that now. They boarded together, leaving the Kethran station behind. As the ship disengaged, Isla stood on the bridge beside Dravik, watching stars stretch into lines of light. Two outcasts who had found each other across the gap between worlds. Two people who had learned that strength wasn't measured in mass or firepower, but in courage to stand for what was right. She leaned into Dravik's side, felt his arm come around her and smiled. They had a long journey ahead, diplomatic challenges, cultural barriers, questions about the future, but they would face it together, human and Kethran, building something new from old prejudices. And that, Isla thought, was worth more than any treaty.